Hello and welcome to the 2017 Threat Assessment. My name is Charles Payne. I run the partner program here at AVG Business by Avast. We're also joined by Greg Mosher, who's our Vice President of Product Engineering. Greg has nearly 20 years experience in the anti-malware industry. He's responsible for all the product management and engineering for the Avast business-to-business unit, obviously focusing strongly on SMB, and you'll see that SMB will be the focus of a lot of the content that we're going to be showing you today inside of our presentation. Greg's a really great speaker. I'm really excited to hear how he summarizes what he's seen in the first half of 2017. He has a lot of experience in the industry. I mean, he even wrote his first antivirus engine in the early 90s. So really interesting speaker, and I'm very interested to see his take on what he's seeing. So this is going to be our agenda for the day. We're going to look at the trends and impacts of the threats that are targeting small businesses that Greg has seen in the first half of 2017. Probably going to be my favorite part of the presentation. Greg is going to go into some specific recent threat examples. I always particularly like that when he starts dissecting, you know, what are these people doing and how are they getting in and manipulating our customers. We're going to also look at the small businesses of today and their need for multi-layered security and some solutions that we have that we can position against that. And then some roadmap information, you know, what you should expect to see from the products and the developments out of our engineering team in the near term. So 2016 really was a year of ransomware. I mean, there's some pretty surprising statistics, and it's getting worse. And again, Greg's going to elaborate this on what he's seeing in the first half of 2017. But you know, 40% of businesses were hit by ransomware in the last year. That's pretty surprising. 60% of those ransomware attacks demanded over $1,000, and 20% demanded over $10,000. I mean, these are not insignificant numbers. So that really impacts the bottom line of these small businesses. But to look a little bit forward, maybe give us a little bit more perspective on these numbers, I think we'll hand things over to Greg and he can take it from here.
Okay, thanks, Charles. Yeah, no, it is obviously very interesting. This is a little bit of a recap of I think what we talked about in March. Any of you that joined that, but you know, it's good to go back and kind of review what was there because it really tells us, you know, what we're facing today or kind of explains the overall trends. One comment I wanted to add as far as this slide itself was, as part of the same study, they actually looked at what the pay rates were for, say, the different major geos, and there was quite a bit of a discrepancy. It was very interesting. Actually found that in Canada, about 75% of the incidents ended up paying the ransom. You know, in the UK, it was about 58% actually paid the ransom. It then decreased. Germany was only about 1 out of 5 would pay, and in the U.S., believe it or not, only 3% paid. And so, you know, I don't really necessarily understand the exact reason behind those numbers, whether maybe backup is a little bit more prevalent, or maybe, you know, the way that the ransomware is actually working is it's actually looking at the environment, looking at the device that it's on, maybe even be looking at the network and trying to determine what sort of ransom to extract. And if it can identify what it thinks is a company, it goes for a much higher ransom. As you see there, 20%, you know, demanded over $10,000. So it could be that that's obviously maybe more of what's hitting in the U.S., which would explain a little bit of the lower pay rate. You know, if it's $1,000, maybe it's not worth the time. You pay it, you get rid of it. If it's 10 grand, that's a little bit different. So anyways, that's an interesting trend that really started last year and has definitely continued this year. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, you know, 2017 and what we're seeing in Q1, and I do have, you know, a handful of very specific examples. You know, but I want to kind of go into general. It's like, what are the actual major trends that we're seeing this year? And really, you know, so far, we're seeing a very much a continuation that spam and phishing is still very much the primary attack vector. And it's just simply because even though that is kind of the old way of doing everything, it's actually it's very, very inexpensive for the threat actors to be able to do mass spam mailings. It's very easy now that, you know, basically cloud email exists everywhere. People can get a hold of credentials and they can send stuff out, as we just saw with the recent Google phishing, which I'll cover in a little bit. But also, by going with more spam and email, it's also making it much easier for the threat actors to actually really start to target businesses and go into something that we call spear phishing. Spear phishing is very much where the threat actor is actually targeting a specific entity, and therefore it's actually mocking up all of its assets to look very much like these are legitimate emails, these are legitimate communications, legitimate documents. And they can do that whenever typically they would go after very large enterprises. Now there's enough toolkits and enough assets out there that they're actually able to do this now even against small businesses. And so we'll look at that, just in a little bit. Financial impacts right now, as far as the downtime and the lost revenue, is definitely outpacing anything that is being extracted ransom-wise. The ransomware guys are making their money by getting ransom, but they're having to cast such a wide net. They're impacting such a large number of businesses. The overall financial impact to, basically the global economy is much, much larger than what the ransoms are that are actually being extracted. So, and going on with this theme, we are definitely, as I mentioned, seeing several new business targeting, strains of malware. Example is Philadelphia and Pederap, which we'll go over. And then, of course, as mentioned, just recently with the Google doc attack that we had last week, we're now seeing, we're actually seeing attacks now against open authentication, which is definitely an escalation going forward. So, just as far as covering just a couple of other things that are kind of important and on the top of mind, is the fact is that doing the actual attacks and actually building ransomware and building malware is actually becoming much, much easier for threat actors. We really saw the strong trend in ransomware last year, that it was moving towards a commoditized space where essentially on the dark net there is actually a complete ecosystem out there of the tools for basically anybody that wants to get into this business to essentially build a business, to essentially build a complete attack vector, campaign plan, and a way to actually extract money out of people. That is a definite trend that we've seen. We've actually seen, we've been able to get our hands on some of these kits. There is now an example of something that's called what you see, what you get encryption, which is actually really very much almost like a GUI environment, very similar to what, say, like normal programs are built in, say, like if you're building something for mobile or whatever. Where the developers can go in and have just a number of options. They can select how they want to do things, how they want to encrypt things, how they actually want to campaign the customer. And a lot of it is just simply point and click, send it out there, and lets them run a campaign, and it then lets them come back and very easily adjust and do it again the next week. So it's these trends is the reason why we continue to see this increase. So moving on, mentioning obviously, really targeting SMBs, and there's a number of studies going out there. I'm sure some of you out there are actually maybe Dado users, which is a BDR backup solution we do integrate with. They've recently produced, a study along with a number of other companies about how we are really seeing SMBs targeted heavily. Again, because it's not hard for the threat actors to be able to spearfish these individual SMBs. So right now, as far as if we look at what was in 2016 and we see this trend continuing, really you can see from 2011 on up, over half of all businesses, all small businesses in 2016 experienced some sort of cyber attack. The scary number out of this is the fact is that really 50% had some sort of data breach, which involved, really customer and employee information. And so this gets into more than just downtime. This gets into more than just extracting ransom. Whenever a piece of malware that actually gets down, maybe ransom, actually could have some piggyback software on it that can actually be extracting data and actually doing, leaking data out of the business. This is a trend that we're starting to see as well. Is now it's not only are they attacking businesses for higher ransoms, but they're also basically attacking places that have more information that they could actually utilize and potentially sell or monetize in different ways. So certainly a trend that does continue. Find my mouse, there we go. So, kind of going into that theme, that the ransom is actually just one part of it. What we really see is the fact is that any time a business is hit with ransomware, 30% have some sort of material loss of revenue. And that is something that, I mean, if you really think about it and you actually sit down and calculate out, that's really the big hit that businesses are taking. 60% of these took more than 9 hours to remediate. You imagine what 9 hours means, probably involving a couple of people out of a small business. That's massive. And that really does have a significant financial impact. And the fact is that, going through, looking at all of the different types of impacts that you could have with ransomware or different threat attacks, 20% of the businesses that actually, experience a sufficient enough of an attack, maybe on multiple devices, actually do have to cease operations immediately. They just go offline. So the impact does tend to be huge. But again, the key is the downtime on this, and downtime equals money for small businesses, and so it is loss of revenue, it is loss of productivity. Continuing on, now we're going to get into the good stuff. Let's actually look at a couple of specific examples. And these are threats that are emerging now. These are very much threats that are fresh, that have actually come out in the first part of this year. The first one that I mentioned is Philadelphia ransomware. Now, this, in fact, is not a new super fancy type of ransomware or super do encryption. This is actually built on top of a variant called Stampado that was offered really starting in June of last year, on the dark web for $40. Basically, you could go buy it. That was a perpetual license. You could go buy it. You could then deliver it and use it all you want. So nobody even, there's no point to even writing your own encryption anymore. You just simply go buy whatever you need and put it out there. What these guys did is they did put a fairly sophisticated command and control server up behind it. The encryption wasn't necessarily all that spectacular for a $40 piece of ransomware. But being able to host the keys and not store the keys on the devices make this extremely difficult to decrypt. But the really big deal about this is the fact is that this is actually targeting actual healthcare. And the fact is that they're actually really doing spear phishing, as mentioned, targeted against hospitals. And you can see a little bit of an example there. Sorry, it may be a little blurry for you. But what they're actually doing is they're delivering a piece of mail that they're masquerading as a HIPAA-compliant document. They're linking to essentially some patient documents saying this is about so-and-so patient, blah, 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 and you need to go and open these documents and take a look at it. These are actually malicious docx files. Again, we talked about last time how there's a number of new methods that are inside of Microsoft Office that while they won't infect the machine or necessarily do anything directly themselves, they are able to deploy ransomware to the machine. And that's exactly what happens. And because the fact is that whenever they do get a hit with this, and they actually know what the target was, they are actually able to extract a significant sum. I'd actually left myself a placeholder in here as far as the common ransom amounts between X and Y. I have since actually managed to complete the research on that, and we are commonly seeing ransom for this between $5,000 and $20,000 U.S. going against the hospitals themselves. Which, whenever it comes down to if it's actual downtime or there's a potential leakage of true HIPAA, compliant information, then the likelihood that the hospital will actually pay the ransom is significantly higher. So, actually, I need to update that in the presentation and will. But again, those numbers are between 5,000 and 20,000 U.S. Okay. Next piece of ransomware. This is Petarap. This is an interesting piece of ransomware that it itself is a little bit different than what we saw with Philadelphia, in that the targeting sophistication just isn't there. This actually, what it actually does is this gets spread through a very typical spam or email with just binary attachments, or typically through the web through exploit kits, so against unpatched machines. That's not all that sophisticated, and therefore the hit rate isn't all that great. But what this does is this acts like a worm once it gets on the network. This actually will go out, it will look at the network, determine based on the number of devices that are out there and the type of devices, hey, this looks like a business network. I'm now going to try to start to spread around. So even though maybe the hit rate isn't there, the fact is once it can get onto one machine in the network, it has the ability to spread to the other vulnerable machines on the network. And if it gets to somebody that actually really is running fairly heavy admin controls for that network, then it can go just about anywhere it wants to. So again, this is very much targeted at businesses. This doesn't make a lot of sense for home networks where homes typically have one at two, most two kind of PCs. But for businesses, it makes absolute sense. The other interesting part about this is a little bit kind of under the scenes of what's happening with the threat actors in the back. This is actually an unauthorized version of the Petya ransomware. Petya is actually a very, very popular ransomware as a service. Where they really provide everything for you. They will, as far as I mentioned, the different sort of ransomware kits that are out there, you can actually build ransomware and then they provide all the back end for you. They'll do all of the fund collection for the ransom. They just simply take their percentage, almost like a credit card processing, and send you the proceeds. So these guys, right now, actually, Petya has not been able to cut them off because they're not using the actual Petya backend, but what they've done is they've actually gone and they've used the Petya actual device ransomware, the thing that gets deployed. And the big deal about that is actually one of the best encryptions, one of the hardest encryptions to break. And they've simply provided their own command and control server for the keys. And like I said, right now, if you end up with this version, this Petya ransomware on your machine, it's not coming back unless you actually pay the ransom. This group has actually proven that they will decrypt for you, but then again, you're going to have to pay for it. So this is, again, it's just a different variant. It kind of shows how ransomware is evolving overall, and does show how more and more they're really interested in looking at businesses, and they're really interested in now employing essentially some very traditional malware techniques, such as worming through a network. Okay. One more piece of ransomware. I know I can talk about ransomware until my face is blue, but we'll stop here. There's obviously, there's dozens of new, very prevalent variants just out within the last 2 months. But I'm just kind of pulling more of the interesting ones. This is one that this actually was discovered by Avast researchers. Actually, Jakob Krustek, who I'm proud to say was actually on my team as one time as a virus researcher, really smart guy. He actually found something called the Kirk ransomware. And for anybody out there that's a Star Trek fan, as you can see in the picture, yes, this is all about Star Trek. And as a matter of fact, whenever a file does get encrypted, it gets the extension .kirked actually applied to it. The big deal about the Kirk ransomware, though, is that it's actually the first ransomware that we've seen that's actually accepting Monero as a cryptocurrency. There's been a lot of discussion within the overall security industry that says, that's questioning says, if we got rid of Bitcoin, do we get rid of the ransomware problem? And the truth is no, because you'd actually have to get rid of all cryptocurrency to have an impact. But then again, there could be additional ways that they can collect money. Right now, just kind of looking on like Shapeshift.io, which is a site that you can transfer essentially cryptocurrency from one currency to another. They right now support, I think, about 40 different cryptocurrencies. There's that many out there. But the interesting thing about Monero is that Monero, unlike Bitcoin is not 100% anonymous. Bitcoin can be traced if you put enough effort into it, but Monero is pretty much completely anonymous. So we're thinking that this is going to be a trend that we're going to see. The other thing about Monero is also the inflation on it is actually sub 1%, whereas the inflation on Bitcoin is still about 4%. Not bad as far as an overall currency, but Monero, in fact, is much better, and it's actually much more stable, which is one of the things that the ransomware guys are looking for, a fairly stable currency to obviously get paid in. So this is interesting. Another interesting thing about this is the fact is it's actually written in Python, which is for I don't know if any of you guys that know out there, but that's a different programming language. It's a fairly high-level programming language, very easy. It's got a lot of script-like capabilities with it. Very easy to adjust. It's not built in real low-level, say native code in languages such as C or C++, but it's something that could actually be adjusted very, very quickly. And the thing is, it's quite capable. It actually is able to encrypt, at least as of whenever we first really looked at and dug into it, 625 different types of files. Again, it continues the trend that the ransomware is now smart enough that it will figure out what files are most likely important to you and go encrypt those first. So even if you determine, or maybe you do have say some antivirus on it, but it's not quite up to stopping this sort of malware right whenever it starts, it'll at least get some amount of your files encrypted, and it will be the files that are most important to you. All right, and just one last plug here is if any of you are interested in kind of following different new trends and different sorts of ransomware and malware we're seeing, I would recommend to follow Jakob. He does not tweet like every day, but when he does, it's actually pretty good stuff. All right. So, getting off of the threats just for a little bit and kind of talking about ransomware. I just wanted to bring to light a new organization that has come along. It's really a project that is actually kind of combination of law enforcement and the various IT security companies. And the purpose really is to not only join forces to try to track down cyber criminals, put them out of business, but to also help victims of ransomware be able to get their encrypted data back. Sorry about the typo there, but get the encrypted data back without having to pay the criminals themselves. So Avast has actually just recently joined this. We actually just joined it last month. And part of what we have on the NoMoreRansom.org site is actually about 40 free decryption tools right now. Actually, I think there may be a few more than that. And as of time of putting this together, we had already contributed 6 of those encryption tools. We have several, or probably 40 or 50 encryption tools actually out on our own blog site that you can go to. But we actually had 6 encryption tools or decryption tools that nobody else had. So we've contributed to the No More Ransom, and new tools are put up there constantly. So anybody that if they end up having, getting a piece of ransomware that does encrypt some stuff on their machine, we certainly encourage to take a look at No More Ransom. This is a good site for really everybody that's online with a Windows machine to know about. Okay. So continuing on, we're going to go back to threats here just real quick before we move on a little bit further. Talk about the Google Docs phishing scam, and this was a late addition, obviously, to the presentation, but I felt it was important enough that I wanted to get it in. The screenshot you see there is actually my Gmail. So we were able to see this inside. I won't name names because it's all basically it's a worm spreading by compromising OAuth. But this is really this is a significant new threat in phishing. The first thing to say is that this did not, at least as far as what it appears, did not end up doing anything malicious except spreading itself once it got the user's credentials. But again, the user's credentials, the username, password, were not asked for. I'm sure probably several of you actually received emails like this. I know I got a couple at work, and I got a couple more with my own personal. But what happens is if you actually clicked on this, and so I actually do have a dummy one that I actually loaded up and forwarded myself the message and went ahead and clicked on it. It comes up and it actually asks you for, basically says Google Docs would like to have permission to, read, write your email, manage your contacts, and you're like, okay, that seems strange, but it's Google Docs, fine, whatever. Okay, Google Docs doesn't need to ask for permissions. It is Google. It already has access to everything. You're already logged in with your credentials to Google Docs, so this is a completely bogus box. What this is a third-party application that is basically signed up through the OAuth system that is now using, or was actually using, Google authentication, and it has now, through basically some masquerading, disguised itself so when the permission box pops up, it comes up and says, this is Google Docs. Obviously, that's a bit of a logic hole for Google. They were able to clean it up very, very quickly. But the point is that while this service was still up and running, if you actually brought that up and clicked allow, this application then had access to your user. It didn't matter that they didn't have your username or password. They had basically the authentication token to be able to use your user, to be able to read your contacts, and to be able to now email all of your contacts. And that's exactly what it did. This wasn't as big of a deal simply because Google was able to shut it down very, very quickly. I know they're saying it was like, some fraction of a percentage. I don't know that I completely believe that because, I saw several examples just myself. And we do have some other, there's been some recent news stories just simply about this. There was one on BBC about the state government of Minnesota in the U.S. basically thinking that this cost them around $90,000 US. And they calculated that out by about 2,500 of their employees received it. And so even if you just take a few minutes each where, there's somebody has to go in and now change their password, bring up the permissions to try to go deny the permissions because they accidentally clicked on, say, allow, you add that all up, it's very easy to see how on a large organization this ends up being hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost productivity very, very quickly. So even though this really did not seem to do anything malicious as far as trying to send malware around or try to actually install something on the victim's machines, it was more of just can it be done, can it spread. This still absolutely had financial impact to businesses everywhere. So this is something that now I think everybody is highly alerted to. I think it was theorized before, but now we've seen it, and it's just been recent. Again, this would be something that could be very, very much targeted at businesses through spear phishing. So again, spam email is kind of the bane of our existence here in 2017. All right, so just going to jump in, going to shift gears a little bit off of kind of specific threats and jump back in talking about essentially SMBs themselves and protecting themselves. We went over a little bit of this in our March webinar, and we talked a little bit about what was coming out as far as our endpoint security from AVG Business and Avast. I'm going to go into this in a little bit more detail now and also talk a bit more about the future. So, one of the things that we're really seeing within the business is that obviously no longer within four walls. Lots of small businesses may not even have four walls anymore. They may be virtual at this point. But, BYOD, which is bring your own device, and BYOA, which is bring your own application, really are realities of modern business. Actually, it doesn't matter what size business they are. And this is commonly what's referred to as shadow IT. It's IT that's actually not controlled by the business itself, and therefore it's very much, they're unknown entities and unknown resources. And essentially IT departments have a hard time managing and monitoring them, and one of the big issues is, of course, security. Mobile theft, basically access on open networks, weak authentication controls, all of these things make bring your own devices, really key sources of corporate data leakage. And what are we talking about in this case? Somebody within a small business is using it, say their mobile phone, even if it's a mobile phone they expense back through the business, fine, it's still their mobile phone and it's not really controlled by an IT department. But yet they're using applications on that mobile device that are accessing, basically company data. These are prime areas where data can be stolen, data can be leaked, and not only bad guys, competitors, whoever can actually get a hold of this. As an example, we actually did a test. This was actually in 2016 Mobile World Congress, where we had a registration booth in Barcelona's airport. And what we did is we actually set up an unsecured Wi-Fi network. And I know I travel a fair amount with this job, with Avast being in Europe and myself being in the States, and I see open networks everywhere. So this is no surprise. But just in 4 hours, we saw more than 8 million data packets, probably from 2,000 devices. That's what surprises me, 2,000 different devices. And we could roughly identify 2/3 of those, basically of not only the devices, but the users that came through. So, if we were a malactor sitting in that airport, there's a whole lot of data we were just able to grab. Spool it down onto a hard drive or a thumb drive, take it away, and there's definitely going to be gems inside of that. Data that could be used to compromise, the integrity of a small business. So that's that for now. Chuck, I'm going to turn over to you. I guess you got a poll question?
Yeah, we've got our first poll. So, asking of the audience, are SMB customers coming to you with concerns about securing data for their traveling employees? Is that a yes? Is that a no? Or perhaps a no, but they really should be? Give everybody a couple minutes to fill that in, maybe about 10 seconds to fill that in, and we'll take a look at the poll results. Okay. Well, yeah, this is interesting. Greg, what's your take?
Yeah, no, it is very interesting. So I think it goes back to an awareness thing. I think the good news is our partners that are on the line, I think they get the threat. I think they understand it. But the fact is I don't know that SMBs really get it. I think a lot of times, particularly when they're working with mobile devices and applications that are out there, it's seen as pure productivity, and it's almost seen as kind of an extension of the consumer world. And yeah, there's threats in the consumer world, but you're one of billions of people. Everybody thinks kind of, what's the chance that somebody's going to, want my stuff? Why me? And I've seen that before with businesses, particularly with smaller, SOHO businesses. Why am I special? Why does anybody want my stuff? Well, as we're seeing with the trends, people do. They can shut you down. They can extract money from you. They can steal your data. And so, to me, I think obviously we've got a lot more education that we need to do on the small businesses themselves, our end, the very end customers. So, okay, all right. Well, thank you everybody for that. Let's continue on. I've got a couple more things to talk about here as we dive a little bit more. We've talked about the small business itself. Want to start talking a bit more about basically AVG and Avast coming together. I did start with this last March, but want to provide a little bit more in-depth detail. And so to summarize again, AVG and Avast have come together, and we've actually already launched our first combined antivirus product, and that has been launched to our consumer market earlier in Q1. It's actually been fully launched. Actually, all AVG consumer customers are now on our brand new combined endpoint security. It is branded as AVG for AVG customers, but in fact, we are on all of the same technology. And it's this bringing together of technology which has really strengthened our overall endpoint and made it really beyond what actually you would think of as traditional antivirus. I think traditional antivirus went away, several years ago, and any of the actual AV players that are left are obviously offering a lot more than this. It really is full-blown, behavioral, machine learning, intrusion, detection, prevention, it's small amounts of secure web gateway, just everything kind of all wrapped up into one on the device itself. But, there's a couple of things that I want to highlight within essentially our endpoint security, which we think is positioned, makes it well positioned for the future as we go forward. And the first one on that is Behavior Shield. I want to talk about this. This has been something that's been in the Avast endpoint for quite some time, but it was really with the acquisition of AVG that we brought over what AVG customers knew as the identity protection technology. And this, in fact, is a significant step up, bringing both the technologies together and really enhancing, essentially putting the AVG identity detection along with a much, much larger install base has really made this essentially our number one system component to really stop ransomware and brand new threats as they emerge. Realize with 240 million desktops around the world, we have 400 million users overall, with 160 as mobile, 240 as desktops. With this, we are spread geographically around the world, so whenever new threats, new ransomware, new anything comes out, we're usually one of the first ones to see it. And it's Behavioral Shield that is actually able to diagnose and essentially stop an extremely large percentage of this brand new stuff that it knows nothing about right away at the source. If it does need some more analysis, it immediately goes into our massive cyber capture network, and quickly, within a matter of minutes, we know what it is, and everybody else is actually protected. But a little bit behind what this does, and you know, I've got a quote in here essentially from Andre Velchek, our CTO, and I do like it. I mean, essentially what it does is it kernelizes all of sort of the key information that can happen with malicious processes on the actual endpoint itself. It's able to take that, decipher it, and package essentially the key points that it needs to send to the cloud for overall correlation with other events that are going on with the world, and is able to do that real time and come back with an answer and saying that, yes, this is something that's malicious, or this is something that we need to monitor a little bit more, or this is actually an okay item. So in this, not only do we stop brand new things before we've even, any researcher has seen a sample of it, but also we have an extremely low false positive rate, which is very important, particularly to businesses. Businesses obviously don't want to have false positives and have their antivirus getting in the way of running their application. So again, Avast version 17, which is the release that has now come out in Q1 this year, it is a significant leap forward by combining all of these capabilities together. So right now with Avast for Business and the Avast business line, we are on this endpoint. We will be launching this endpoint in early July across our entire business product line. So you will be having this. Right now, actually, our AVG business already do have this. They're just not backed by as many endpoints as what the combined Avast one will be. But this is going to be a significant leap forward as we continue, as the trends with ransomware and the trends with targeting small businesses with brand new, fresh threats continues. Okay. Another one to go into is Wi-Fi Inspector, and I have talked a little bit, and have talked some in the past about basically threats that we see utilizing IoT, the Internet of Things, or as our CEO calls it, the insecurity of things. Matter of fact, we talked about in March about the Mirai botnet, and now there's actually another one that's actually replacing Mirai called Hajime. And this is a botnet made completely of IoT devices, of vulnerable IoT devices. And these botnets continue to grow. These botnets continue to basically perpetrate attacks against sites worldwide. And one of the things that can actually really be done is that you can actually go out and we can actually look at these IoT devices as they're connected to a local Wi-Fi, and we can know a lot about them. We can understand whether or not these are vulnerable IoT devices or not. We can also look at the different sort of networking equipment. This fits both home and actually small business. We can look at the routers. We can look and see if there's certain settings turned on the routers that actually make this much more vulnerable. And this, quite frankly, is something that's just run from the desktop AV. It can be run on demand, or it can run continuously. And it can simply run in the background and alert you if there's a problem. Maybe somebody's come in and they've installed a new security camera, or somebody's come in and put on internet radio, and they find that actually maybe that has a firmware on it that hasn't been patched. It's not secure, or there's some sort of problem. This will actually pop up and alert you. So this is actually a really, really nice feature. I think targeted definitely at a little bit of the lower end of the SMB business, probably not a feature necessarily for a 100-plus company, but particularly for small businesses and SOHOs, this is an extremely, I think, valuable tool that is just simply provided within the next generation AV that we've got. And then kind of last, and this goes back to the four walls question. Whenever small business users are out there traveling, as our poll question showed, they really don't think about it. They don't think about open networks. But again, I travel and there's open networks everywhere. And that's mainly because the way that most of the public Wi-Fi has gone is it's an open network where they put a captive portal, stumbled on my words there, where you basically have to go in and you have to accept the terms of use. They'll generally try to, upsell you to a better, internet experience for an hour. That's common at many airports. But the fact is the connection between the device and then that actual access point is not encrypted. It's in the open, and of course you're in an extremely public place. You can't see everybody that surrounds you. You don't know what they're doing. There are so many tools out there today, so many tools and so many devices they can sit there and just simply grab data out of the air, and they can pull whatever information they need. Our study that we did, like I said, a year ago at Mobile World Congress really showed that. And the easiest way around that, there's lots of different things that could be implemented, but the easiest way around it is simply use a personal VPN. And Avast does actually have a VPN called SecureLine. I personally use all of the tools, and I quite frankly, I definitely use this tool as somebody that travels a lot. It's very easy to use. It actually supports Windows, OS X, Android, and iOS. So regardless of what device you've got, you can install it, you can deploy it on that device. And again, whenever you connect to the network, you can encrypt all of your traffic that is going between your device and the endpoint. Actually, really all the way to the site itself, even if the endpoint, or I'm sorry, the access point, maybe there's some question of where the network goes after the access point. This will still encrypt all the way through to your target. A lot of people think basically personal VPNs are more about, can I get access to some, Netflix or some sort of resource by pretending that I'm in another location. That is part of it, but I think a lot of people overlook really the secure aspects of it. And what we really focus on with SecureLine is much more the security aspects. We do provide the ability, as you can see, particularly when you're mobile, it's really handy to be able to connect through various points of presence around the world. We have a number of them, but really our main focus on this is security. And again, this is something that we designed, we built, and we completely operate ourselves. There's no third parties here in the way that we question maybe where this data is being routed. This is completely through Avast. Okay, so next poll question. Chuck, this is a good one.
Yeah. So asking of the audience, what sort of edge security do you prefer using? Next-gen firewalls, universal threat management devices, secure web gateways, something else that we haven't listed in this list, or are you not using anything at all? Give you guys a few seconds to answer that, and let's see what the results are. Okay, let's take a look. Okay. Greg, what do you make of this?
It'd be interesting. I think we're going to need to dig a little bit deeper on it. It'd be interesting to see a lot of what the other is. We just didn't want to fill this list up, but I didn't think the other was going to be so high, so that's quite interesting, actually. So, yeah, and as kind of expected, I expected next-gen to be the highest on this. So that's okay. Good. Thank you, everybody. So let's go ahead and move on. We just got a couple of more things to show and discuss. But let's talk about what's next. And obviously that was a little bit of a leading question. And, when we talk about, various ways that we need to move forward in this whole thing about the fact is that a business is no longer just some desktops wired Ethernet to some server and a router that goes out to the internet. The fact is it's any number of devices. It's applications that reside both in an office and more likely in the cloud. What is it that you need? And so we talk about secure web gateways. And really, when I want to talk about secure web gateways, I'm really talking about the concept of it and a lot of the feature functionality that it provides. Some of the feature functionality makes sense today, some of it doesn't. Per say secure web gateways that were developed 4 or 5 years ago. So there's a natural evolution that's there. And we're already seeing it in the enterprise space. If you look at, say, companies like Zscaler, where you're actually now handling an enterprise business where you're routing any amount of, say, traffic from different companies, different headquarters, branch offices that can all be basically routed by the cloud through Zscaler, and you can provide any layer of filtering and capability on top of that, cloud application control, cloud security brokers. That is really kind of ultimately, I think, where you would like to take a lot of stuff. Now, that's very much enterprise at that point, isn't a bit beyond where an SMB sits. But there's definitely a more kind of tempered step towards that really does involve a lot of the heavy-duty endpoint technology that we already have and some aspects of secure web gateway. And really the focus is now, like I said, not only basically securing, say, the Windows devices or the Mac devices that are sitting inside of an office, but handling all the mobile devices and the different types of endpoint devices, the production devices that leave the office. So bringing all of this stuff together, and the key here is really having the advanced endpoint technology to do a lot of the heavy lifting and giving you that massive sensor network of understanding what's going on with the threats, marrying that up with a global view through something like a secure web gateway is really what actually the trend is definitely going towards. And this is something this is a very sneak peek towards what we as Avast are now working our way towards. So I won't give you any more details than that, but that is definitely the direction as more and more of the security moves to the cloud. But our heavy-duty security is going to remain anchored on the endpoint while those production devices still exist, because that's where threats originate. Okay, so a little bit in what's kind of next, a little bit more specific for us. In 2017, we're still very much tactically focused as far as really spreading essentially the goodness that we do have with our endpoint technology to essentially everybody within all of our business customers, both AVG and Avast Business. So we will be launching, actually, in really about another quarter, as I mentioned, we're going to be launching the Avast endpoint for business that's going to cover everybody. And we're going to have a couple of different levels of that. We're going to have both a data protection and an online privacy protection flavor as well. Now, that'll be if you just simply purchase the AV Direct itself. If, in fact, you're using it managed, say through CloudCare or Managed Workplace, you will be getting the top line of the AV, which is going to be the full data and online privacy protection through that. We will always provide the top level of endpoint security that we have to our managed customers. So, noting that we are integrating that within CloudCare and Managed Workplace, again, that's all going to happen at the same time. It's going to be at the beginning of next quarter. And at the same time, also with that, actually a little bit before, we're going to be releasing our network assessment for Managed Workplace. If any of you were on Ryan's talk last week, he went into that a little bit more about the network assessment. This actually allows our service providers to be able to go in and talk to those SMBs, that maybe don't understand exactly what their vulnerabilities are, what their exposure is. This is going to be something that's provided through Managed Workplace. It'll be an easy kind of just single one instance deploy that can be run, and we can do a network assessment within that network and combine a lot of the different technologies that you've seen here. So that's coming out. And then on top of that, as we collect a lot more data out of that, and we continue to tune our products to focus more and more on security, which is definitely our direction as part of the combined company. We are looking at actually really improving right now. There's a number of new assets and new artifacts that we are seeing not only on the network but at the device level that we will be feeding back to our correlation engine, not only to give ourselves additional information to help protect the network better, but to also be able to give our managed service providers more actionable information for them to help secure their customers' network. Next year, this is really far out, but you can see, the discussion of the next generation of Avast Business Endpoint. We are actually looking at additional feature functionality beyond what I talked about here. We will be, expanding the threat detection prevention, as I mentioned, more to a cloud level as we really start to focus on making sure that we're bringing a umbrella protection, particularly making sure we're covering those mobile devices and we're covering those customers or those SMB end users that are, say, leaving the office. And then we will also be continuing to expand our overall network assessment and starting to get to the point where we're providing remediation, automatic remediation for security issues and vulnerabilities that we do find within the network itself. Again, that will be, I think, a great plus for our MSPs out there as they go to new sites. Not only can they tell the site, say, hey, you've got these problems, but they're then able to follow up with those and actually remediate right then and there. So I think that's going to be a big plus. But going on, just kind of last thing I always want to note, as always, make sure to check out our blog site. You'll find some of the information that I talked about here today. You'll find actually a lot of information I didn't talk about because, I mean, I only have so much time to bring it up. But I always encourage, please visit our blog site. Very, very active. We actually have, I mean, dozens of new blogs coming out every month, actually maybe even more than that. And there's a lot of very detailed information there. But there's also a lot of information, a lot of top-level information just on essentially protecting business. A lot of information that's actually provided at a very high level that, quite frankly, whenever you're talking to your own customers, is information that you could point them to or provide that they would be able to understand. Not all of it's real deep technical. So, and Chuck, you got one more poll question, I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Greg. That was fantastic. So last poll question to the audience, and just sort of looking forward as well, what would you like to see covered in the next threat assessment webinars? Our plans are to have these every quarter, so every 3 months or so. So, in the second half of 2017, what would you like to see us talking about? Is there anything that you saw in the previous webinars, to either today or the one that we did in Q1 that you would like to see more of a deep dive on? Is there anything that you would not like to see, for example, that we've spent time on talking about that you just prefer us focusing on something else? So if you have any comments on that, please feel free to submit your comments. And I'm going to leave this up for a few minutes because it is a sort of a free form to fill in. But while we're doing that, let's go ahead and clear the Q&A. There's not a lot of questions there. That's something else I'd like to encourage you guys to do. If you have any questions in the Q&A, questions, please type it into the Q&A and we'll work through them. Jason has a question about another antivirus vendor recently caused a major problem for customers by quarantining a Windows OS file. And was wondering, what does AVG, / Avast do to ensure that that doesn't happen? So, really, how do we... A false positive question, right? How do we avoid these false positives? Greg, can you help us with that?
Yeah, I was just about to type into Jason, but it's probably easier that I just say it for everybody. So with this is something that all AV vendors have gone through. I know we went through this as AVG. I mean, just to open the kimono, I can quite frankly remember it wasn't that long after I started. I think we quarantined, significant, or basically several significant key files out of System 32 for all Italian versions of Windows XP. And that causes a massive problem. So essentially what it is, you get burned by this a couple of times, and you basically build all the processes and all the checkpoints in the way. That's really what it comes down to. A lot of it also is based off of different sort of digital certificates. You have final checks in there when you look at the digital certificates and make a decision where you actually even go back to kind of our command and control and ask, really, should I quarantine this? Everything that's showing me that this is a system file, but I think it's bad. So a lot of it is just building the systems, not only kind of on the overall update release mechanism and the QA on that, but also being able to have a way to quickly solve that on the back end. That if something does happen, and now you do find that you've got some machines that are causing problems, there's a way to recover very quickly from a back end. We do have so much back end interaction that tells all the other AVs do not do that. So that's primarily what it is. I can just simply say we have a number of processes and systems to prevent that. Can I say that it's 100% chance that it would never, ever happen? If I said that, there's smart enough people on the line, I think you know that I'm lying. But the fact is that is something we take very, very seriously because as both AVG and Avast, we have been burned in the past. And fortunately, it's been a long time since we've had something like that happen. Okay, so while I'm answering, let me go. I can look, and so it looks like we've got one from Jason, or from Josh, sorry. Having trouble clearing the CloudCare portal from devices which no longer exist. If they're decommissioned externally, we don't get a chance to uninstall the product, or the equipment is stolen, for example. When uninstalling from the portal, the devices usually remain forever until they're back on and properly removed. Okay, so Josh, there is a way to actually clear that. I believe that we actually have it in some of the FAQs. We do have, I don't know if you've who in our customer care that you've actually talked to. But if you want to get back in touch with them, please ask to to talk to either James or Javier in Cloud Care Tier 3. They know how to do that to get you cleared out. So that would be the best answer there. We do have a way to do that. I think it's not real obvious through the product though. Okay. And let's say, do you have a view on the worth or not of Trusteer Rapport and all the major banks recommend? I don't, not a recent one. I had actually looked at that a while ago, basically as part of just some business development that we were doing with AVG. I don't really. I mean, at this point, I think it's. I think it's a very mature product that I think they've really built in a lot of intelligence. What I'm not real clear on is how well it's been kind of keeping up with all of the changes. So, I mean, obviously it's got a lot of backing behind it. I mean, but it's sorry, not such a clear answer. That's something that I think I would have to go and do a little bit more research on. Maybe what we'll do is if we can have a follow-up sort of information on this, Chuck, we could put a little bit of answer to that. Something, yeah. I don't have a great view. I think to give a really good solid answer on that right now. Not a current one.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Well, it looks like we've gone ahead and cleared out the Q&A. Let's move things on to the last slide, which is thank you for attending, everyone. We had a great turnout and a lot of people registered for these technical webinars. I think that's just a credit to the great presenter that Greg is, and then everybody got the word then when we did this in Q1. So thanks again, Greg, for a very interesting presentation. A big thank you to all of you for attending. And please register for the next session, the Q3 session, which we're planning in July. The invite should be going out shortly for those, so just keep an eye out for those. And thanks again. Take care, everyone.